This screencast is going to cover the revision question CameraCo, which looks at the area of CVP analysis. So the first thing we'll do is look at the requirements. We're asked to determine the selling price per unit, variable cost per unit and contribution per unit for CAM360 based on information above. Then you're asked a break-even point, margin of safety, sales level for a budgeted profit, so essentially a target profit analysis, and then identify 4 sources of information you would suggest Terry to assist in improving the sales volume forecast. So some calculations and a bit of a narrative. Then you're also kind of somewhat of a different situation where Terry is also considering bringing the sales and marketing of the new product in-house and not using DistribuCo. So based on that, what fixed level of marketing costs will be incurred in-house. Then you're asked to do another analysis in terms of calculating the break-even point and the margin of safety. And finally then some 4 non-financial factors that should be considered. So again, it just gives you an idea. This is all to do with CVP from looking at the requirements straight away. And you know there's some calculations and there's also some narrative pieces as well. So it just gives you a bit of information when you're going through the question. So now have a stop at the screencast, have a read through in depth the narrative information and the numbers that are given to you, and then we'll move forward. So you can see the general gist here is CameraCo have launched a new product, Cam360. Terry's the managing director, somewhat unsure in terms of the volume forecast there, and he also wants to run the numbers in terms of how profitable this product could be and the main issues in terms of pricing and target profits. So you're given some information here about the budget for 2016. You're told about sales, the direct costs, and in the fixed and other costs as well, giving a budgeted profit of 220 grand. However, there's 2 notes involved as well. You're told this is based on 3,750 cameras being sold, but also an important here is that the revenue here is shown on a net basis, i.e. after the commission has been taken. So really that is not the full sales value. The full sales value is 100%, whereas this is only representing 90% because 10% is already taken off. Likewise, you're told note 2 for labour. Labour is a mixed cost with the fixed element to be 150 and obviously the residual must be your variable element. So again, it's always important to read the information that's given, both the narrative and the numbers, and particularly any notes involved. So the first question we're going to look at is part A. We're asked to determine the selling price per unit, variable cost per unit and contribution per unit. Alright, so relatively straightforward. So we look at sales on a total basis and we look at it on a per unit. So sales in total was 1350. Put that in the middle. And a per unit basis, well, it's 13.35 million over 3750. So that means on a per unit basis it's 360. However, and this was one of the tricks and important in the question that you be aware of, is that is actually only 90%. The sales line here, you're told, is shown on a net basis after commission. Commission in reality is a variable cost. It should be shown separately, and it will be important to show separately when we come to the second part of this question, where we're looking at getting rid of our distributor. So the first thing is then full sales price. Well, actually the full sales price is the 360 divided by 0.9, so it's 400. So you're essentially saying that actually the sales revenue shown here is only 90% because you've already taken 10% off. Therefore the full sales price is €400 per camera. Right, so a bit of a trick there, but again it's important. If you read the question carefully and you understood what was going on, you'll be able to identify that. Now we look at variable costs. We're going to have direct materials, we're going to have some labour, and don't forget you also have your commission. So remember, the commission in this instance is a variable cost. The total commission, so we'll start up here, we'll start the way we've been laid out. Direct materials, we know the total of direct materials is 562,500. All of that is variable, because I'm not told otherwise. The labour element, however, is 150,000 of that is fixed. So it's a mixed cost, therefore the balance, i.e. 337,500 minus 150, must be the variable element. So actually, now this should be 150,000. So now we have our variable element, and now the commission is the final one. We know that the full sales revenue is 400 times 3750 is 1.5 million, and we also know commission then is 10% of that. so 150,000. So remember, variable, just because it's shown on a net basis there, that's incorrect in terms of the CVP analysis. We want to keep them separate to see what's the full sales price and what's the full variable cost. So adding them up gets us to 900,000 as a total variable cost, and on a per unit basis we just divide each by the number of units, meaning our total variable cost is 240. And notice the variable cost per unit for commission is 40, i.e. the difference here 10% of 400. So we're just trying to link back the information. So the contribution per unit then is your sales price, full sales price minus your variable cost, meaning the contribution per unit, or per camera if you want, is 160. Right? So the only little, well, there are two little bits there that you have to watch out for. One is to strip out the impact of the commission, which is a variable cost that should be shown separately. And the second was to identify that labour you're told is a mixed cost, and to figure out what is the mixed or the variable portion and what is the fixed portion. So that is part A. Part B, then you're asked, calculate the break-even point in units and sales revenue and the margin of safety for 2016, and briefly comment on your results. Where we know to get the break-even point, we need is equal to our fixed costs over your contribution per unit. So for every camera you sell, you're going to generate a contribution of 160. However, the first port of call is to cover all the fixed costs that you have. So in fixed costs, we'll figure out what they are. Well, some labour element is going to be there, because we know there's a labour portion. You're going to have fixed manufacturing costs, and you're also going to have other fixed costs. So we'll put them in. We know the fixed element of labour is 150. We know that fixed manufacturing costs are 110, and we know the other fixed costs are 120 from the question up here. So adding those together gets us to total fixed costs of 380,000. We already know our contribution per unit is 160 from above. So essentially a way to rephrase this question is, how many cameras do you have to sell by generating €160 per camera to cover the amount of fixed costs, i.e. to make 380,000. So the break even in units is 380,000 over 160, i.e. you need to sell 2,375 cameras. And don't forget, you're also asked to do it in sales revenue, so the break even in euro revenue will be essentially just the 2375 times 400. So you need to make sales of 950,000 to break even. So again, that just gives the manager of CameraCo an idea of, look, what scale do we need to reach here to break even in its first year, right? And particularly around the volume side of things, because as you know already up here, Terry is not sure about the volume assumption. Therefore, we want to see is there much of a buffer. And that buffer then is measured by the margin of safety. So the margin of safety in units is what your expected volume is, which is 3750, minus 2375. So it's 1,375 units. And also, particularly, you're looking for a margin of safety in percentage terms. So that's 1375 over 3750. So i.e. the number of units that it can fall by over the current expected number of units. So when you're asked to briefly describe or comment on your results, I'm essentially looking for a comment to say sales revenue can fall, or the number of units can fall by 37% before Cam 360 breaks even. So that's a very insightful comment to make, because that gives you an idea of the buffer that's there based on the current volume forecast before this thing becomes loss-making. Right. So that is part B in terms of break even and margin of safety. The next one, part C, is what's called a target profit analysis. So what you're asked is, what's the level of units in sales, how many Cam 360s do you need to sell before you make a budgeted profit of 400. So again, useful to have a think about it in high level terms first. You said here you're making a sale of 3750, and you're making a profit of 220,000. Therefore, straight away you know it's going to be more than 3,750 units because you want a larger profit, nearly double that. So how you work it out is the required units, the formula will be its target profit, and this is in the notes, so go back and look at your slides, plus your fixed costs over your contribution per unit. The logic being, you know the contribution per unit for here is 160 per camera. So again, putting it in an alternative way, you're essentially asking, how many cameras do I need to sell, given that each camera generates €160, before I can cover both my fixed costs, i.e. 380, plus the target profit. So it has to cover both, because I want to make that profit as well. The target profit is 400,000. So that means the total of them added together is 780,000. So required units will be the 780 over 160. So that means it's 4875. So I need to sell 4,875 cameras to make a profit of 400,000 units. Now, there is an alternative way going about it if you want to. If you don't have to pay attention. You can skip on to the next one. One way of looking at the relationship is, well, I know here 3750 units makes 220,000 profit. I know each additional camera makes 160. So I need to make additional profits over and above the base of 400 minus 220. So I need to make more additional profits over this of 180. Therefore, I need to sell additional units of 180 over 160 of 1125. So if you add the 1125 to 3750, you come to the same answer. You can look at it either way. Whichever way you're more comfortable with, it's totally acceptable as long as you show your logic. Okay. So that is part C, determine the level of sales. Part D then is more of a narrative piece, so again you can look at the suggested solution in terms of this. There will be a lot of acceptable answers here. The point is, Terry is unsure about the sales forecast because again this is a new product. He's not really sure about the volume forecast. There's 3750 is the one currently assumed, and he'd like to do a bit more work on it. And you're asked to identify 4 sources of information you would suggest that Terry may use to assist improving the sales forecast, and explain your reasons. That's important. Identify them and explain your reason. So again, this will get at your knowledge. I'm trying to bring in here other disciplines in terms of marketing knowledge, etc. So some points that students could say is in terms of, is there any market statistics out there? Can you use prior volumes from similar type products that have already been out there to get a basis of how it performed in the first year? You may also ask Distribco what is their basis of, what is their interpretation in terms of the volume demand for this, as they will be maybe closer to the target market that this product is aimed for. Of course, other ones could be, you could talk to sales reps directly, although you don't have any because you actually outsource all of your sales and marketing. Alternatively, you could argue that you could commission some market research in terms of surveys or questionnaires to get an idea of sales volume forecasts. So there's nothing very prescriptive here. It's more so for the student to come up with 4 solid sources of information they could use to improve the sales volume forecast, and importantly as well, explain their reasoning. Why it would be useful, particularly in the context of, so what I don't want to see students is say, go and talk to your sales reps, because that clearly indicates you haven't read the question. CameraCo currently do not have any sales reps, because we currently have outsourced it. So if you want to talk to, you're more than likely going to talk to Distribco. Okay? So that is part D, looking at a bit of a narrative piece around the calculations. Looking at part E then, so we know already the background is that CameraCo to date have not taken part in any of their sales and marketing activities. They've outsourced everything. However, for this new product line, the MD is considering bringing some of the sales and marketing in-house and not using Distribco. So the first part of part E is, you're asked, based on the current assumed level of activity, i.e. 3750 units, What level of fixed marketing costs could be incurred in-house to be equivalent to the cost of DistribCo's services? So again, to some extent this is a very straightforward question if you understood what was being asked. You're essentially asked how much is DistribCo's services being cost currently based on assumed level of activity, and that is how much you could actually spend in-house if you decide to bring your sales and marketing in there. So currently you have number of units 3750. The revenue will be 374 times 400, and then the commission is that times 10%. So it was somewhat, unless you understood the question, again, don't be afraid to reread the question, make sure you understand what's been asked. All you're being asked there is in terms of how much is DistribCo currently getting under this proposed situation, where they get 10% commission based on the current number of units of 3750. There's 1.5 million revenue, and they'll get 150 grand. Therefore, there's 150 grand available to spend in-house if we don't go with DistribCo services. So point F is a follow-on point from that then, that if Terry did choose to bring the sales and marketing in-house and incur the amount determined in E, i.e. 150 grand, calculate the break-even point in units and sales and the margin of safety and comment on your findings in comparison to the calculations previously. So the first thing is, well, now we have to get, well, what is the break-even? We have to figure out, well, what is the contribution now and what are the fixed costs? Because remember, the structure has changed now because we've taken on more fixed costs and we've reduced our variable costs, because remember, we've removed our commission. So we've changed the operating leverage in the cost structure. So sales price remains the same at 400 per unit. Variable cost. The original variable cost, which was calculated previously, was 240, but now the commission is gone. Therefore, we can reduce 40 off that, meaning the new variable cost per unit is 200 euro. So the only thing we've changed there is we've reduced some of our variable costs. We no longer have to pay a 10% commission. However, the fixed costs have now changed. The original fixed costs were up here 380, but now we have sales and marketing costs, because remember, we're going to spend them in-house and we're going to treat them as a fixed cost of 150. So whereas our variable cost has fallen by 40 per unit, our fixed costs have gone up by 150 grand, and they are now 530. So our new CPU is 400 minus 200, which means our new CPU is 200 as well. And now our new break-even in units is your total fixed cost, which is 530 over 200, which is 2650 units. And remember, you're asked for a new break-even in euro rev as well, and that would be essentially, the sales price hasn't changed, so it's 2650 times 400. So on a high level, our break-even has gone from, they were originally 1375, it's now gone up to 2650. So it is nearly doubled in comparison to what our break-even point was before. And the new margin of safety in units, it's 3750 minus the break-even. So our margin of safety now is only 1100 units, and margin of safety percentage is, it's the 1100 over the current expected number of units, 3750. So the margin of safety has fallen down to 29%. So again, remember, you're asked to do the calculations but also comment on your findings. So essentially what you're looking at here is, well, what happened in B? Margin or break even was 2375, margin of safety was 1375, 37%. Break even point here now is 2650, and the margin of safety is fallen down to 1100, so 1100. So apologies, the break-even hasn't doubled. It has only gone from 2375, I was looking at the wrong one, to 26650. So it's gone up a small bit, but it hasn't nowhere near doubled. But the comment you're looking for here now is, you're saying, well, based on this new cost structure, you're essentially changing from removing some variable cost and bringing in some fixed costs. You've increased your break-even, i.e. you've increased your risk as well, and you've reduced your margin of safety buffer. But again, a student can rightly point out there's still a significant buffer here of 30% before you break even. But one of the points I wanted to get at in the question is, you're not really sure if this 3750 is a solid figure based for your demand for the new product, because again, it is very much a new product. So you're not really sure in terms of what the actual demand will be. Therefore, that is somewhat risky of a proposal. And that's the point I wanted students to draw out then, by briefly discussing 4 non-financial factors that should be considered regarding this idea, i.e. of not using DistribCo and bringing sales and marketing in-house. So again, there's a vast collection, no more than Part D, in terms of valid points that are made here, but what I want a student to do is discuss them as well and make sure you articulate why it's relevant. So for example, you could argue that, look, this brings a lot more risk in terms of increased fixed costs, which you're not really sure, depending on what the demand is, may be covered. You're reducing your margin of safety or buffer. You may not have the capabilities because you've never done this before. Is it really wise to start now? And of course, there's other practical considerations in terms of how will this damage your relationship with DistribCo already, in terms of, well, what are they going to do with your other products in your portfolio? And maybe even perhaps you may have a distribution agreement already that precludes you from using anyone else, only DistribCo for new products. So again, this is more thinking with a broader managerial perspective of, yes, the numbers may fit, but what are the other non-financial factors that you have to consider? So that was CameraCo, a revision question for CVP analysis.